This is a story that reminds us how unforgiving nature can be, and how easily the hunter can become the hunted. On the afternoon of December 6, 1997, a man named Yuri Trush lifted his rifle and moved cautiously through a frozen forest in eastern Russia. 3 armed men followed closely behind him, along with his loyal hunting dog. They were tracking something, or someone. The trail ahead was streaked with pink snow, faintly glistening under the pale winter light. Every man in the group felt it, that uneasy sense of being watched. After nearly an hour of careful walking, Yuri spotted a small wooden cabin sitting in a clearing. It belonged to a hunter named Vladimir Markov, who had gone missing a few days earlier. That's why Yuri and his team were out there, to find him. But as they approached, a terrible feeling settled in Yuri's chest. Something was wrong. He was a tough man, 47 years old, an ex-soldier, a weightlifter, and a seasoned hunter. He had seen violence before. But what he found that day would stay with him forever. All around the cabin were signs of chaos. Furniture was smashed and scattered across the snow. A ceramic sink was shattered into pieces. Beehive boxes were ripped apart as if something had clawed through them. And everywhere he looked, there was blood. Dark stains soaking into the white snow. A trail of pink slush leading straight to the front door. On that door was a bloody handprint. Yuri raised his rifle and pushed the door open with the barrel. The cabin was completely dark inside. No windows, no light. Slowly, his eyes adjusted. The sight froze him in place. The walls were covered in deep claw marks. Furniture was overturned and broken. Blood spattered across the floor and walls. But there was no body. No Vladimir. Yuri's heart started pounding. If Vladimir wasn't here, maybe he had escaped. Maybe he was still alive somewhere in the forest. He turned to his team and motioned for them to move. The moment they stepped back outside, 3 things happened. Yuri's dog began whining, pacing in frantic circles. A flock of crows suddenly erupted from the trees, screeching as they flew into the sky. And then came a sound that made every man freeze. A deep, rumbling growl rolled through the forest. It was so low it felt like the ground was vibrating. The men raised their rifles, eyes darting through the trees, searching for the source. The growl came again, closer this time. Something enormous was out there, hidden in the trees, watching them. 5 days earlier, on December 1st, Vladimir Markov had been out hunting in these same woods. He was tired, frustrated, and ready to call it a day. His 3 dogs trailed behind him as he lit a cigarette and stared out into the cold, empty forest. Then he saw something strange up ahead. A massive wild boar lying dead in the snow. Steam still rose from its body. It was a fresh kill. Vladimir raised his rifle and scanned the tree line, but saw no one. Whatever had killed the boar was gone. He waited for a moment. Then curiosity got the better of him. He walked over to the carcass. The snow around it was stained dark red. The animal had been torn open by something powerful. Its ribs shattered, its flesh shredded. But this was no wolf kill. The wounds were too deep, too wide. Vladimir hesitated. Then, thinking like a hunter, he decided to take the meat. He cut off as much as he could carry, packed it up, and headed back to his cabin before the sun disappeared. That night, the forest outside his cabin was silent. Too silent. His dogs were restless. They kept pacing, growling at the door, and barking into the darkness. He told them to quiet down and went to sleep, ignoring the unease in his gut. But outside, in the freezing stillness, a massive shape moved through the trees. 2 yellow eyes gleamed in the dark. The creature followed the scent of blood, and the scent of the man who had stolen its kill. By morning, the forest was covered in a thin layer of new snow. Vladimir stepped outside, stretching and breathing in the cold air. His dog circled near the cabin, sniffing nervously. He brushed it off as nothing and went about his day, chopping wood and tending to the fire. But every few minutes, he caught himself glancing toward the tree line. There was a strange stillness in the woods. No birds, no wind, no sound at all. Later that afternoon, he went to check on the meat he had stored outside in a wooden crate. When he lifted the lid, his heart sank. The meat was gone, completely stripped away. Only a few bones remained, splintered and gnawed. Vladimir felt a chill run down his spine. He looked around, scanning the trees. There were huge paw prints in the snow, larger than any he had ever seen. He backed toward his cabin, his rifle in hand. His dogs started barking again, their fur standing on end. That night, Vladimir barely slept. The sound of branches breaking echoed in the distance. Something heavy moved around his property. The dogs barked and growled nonstop. Then, sometime after midnight, the noise stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. When dawn broke, Vladimir found more tracks around the cabin, deep impressions in the snow leading right up to his door. He realized then that whatever had taken his meat had come back for more. But this time, it wanted him. For the next 2 days, he tried to ignore it. He stayed inside, keeping the fire burning, sleeping with his rifle nearby. But on the 3rd night, it returned. The dogs began howling again, louder than ever. Vladimir shouted for them to be quiet, but they wouldn't stop. One of them broke loose and ran into the woods, barking furiously. Then the sound was cut off, replaced by a single sharp yelp. Vladimir froze. He ran to the window but saw only darkness. His 2 remaining dogs were pacing near the door, trembling. Then something slammed against the wall of the cabin. The entire structure shook. He stumbled back, clutching his rifle. Another blow hit, this time harder. Boards cracked. The dogs went berserk. Vladimir fired a warning shot through the wall. The gunshot echoed through the forest, but whatever was outside didn't move. It only growled, low and deep, like thunder rolling beneath the earth. A clawed paw ripped through the window frame, scattering glass across the room. Vladimir fired again, but the creature vanished into the dark. He stayed awake until dawn, every muscle tense, waiting for another attack. But morning came quietly. When he finally stepped outside, he saw what it had done. The side of the cabin was covered in long gouges. The wooden beams were splintered. His storage shed was destroyed. And behind the cabin, he found the bodies of his dogs, torn apart, dragged halfway into the woods. Vladimir was no fool. He knew the creature would return. He needed to prepare. He reinforced the cabin door with heavy planks and nailed metal sheets over the broken window. He set traps around the perimeter and cleaned his rifle, checking every bullet. He even built a fire pit near the entrance so he could see anything approaching at night. He spent the entire day working, pushing through exhaustion and fear. When darkness fell, he sat by the fire with his rifle across his knees, waiting. The wind picked up. Snow began to fall. For a while, everything was quiet. Then, somewhere in the distance, came that same low growl. It was closer than before. Vladimir steadied his rifle and peered through the small crack in his window covering. At first, he saw nothing. Then, 2 glowing eyes appeared between the trees. They blinked once, then began moving toward him, slow, deliberate, unhurried. He could finally see it clearly now. A massive Siberian tiger, nearly 12 feet long from nose to tail. Its fur was orange and black, its muscles rippling beneath the snow-dusted coat. It was beautiful and terrifying. The tiger stopped just outside the firelight. It stared directly at the cabin, its breath rising in thick clouds. Then it turned and disappeared into the dark. For the first time, Vladimir understood. This wasn't just a wild animal. It was hunting him, and it wasn't going to stop until one of them was dead. He sat there all night, gripping his rifle, eyes fixed on the door. The snow kept falling, the fire crackled low, and somewhere out in the trees, the tiger waited, patient, silent, and watching. When dawn came again, Vladimir was still alive. But deep down, he knew that night had only been a test. The tiger had learned his defenses. Next time, it would come prepared, and Vladimir would not survive the next encounter. For the next 2 days, the tiger didn't return. The forest was eerily calm. No birds sang, no animals stirred. It was as if the entire wilderness held its breath, waiting for what came next. Vladimir tried to convince himself that maybe the tiger had moved on. Maybe it had lost interest. But deep down, he knew better. A predator that calculated like this wasn't giving up. It was planning. He went about his routine, staying close to the cabin, gathering firewood, and keeping his rifle within reach at all times. He barely ate. Every little sound outside made him flinch. Then, on the evening of December 5th, the air changed. The temperature dropped sharply, and a thick fog rolled through the forest. The silence was suffocating. That's when he heard it. The faint crunch of snow outside the cabin. Slow, heavy, purposeful. Vladimir froze. He listened again. Another step, closer this time. His dog began growling from under the table. The sound stopped. Then a loud thud hit the side of the cabin, shaking the walls. Vladimir's breath quickened. He lifted his rifle and aimed it toward the door. The handle rattled slightly, as if something massive brushed against it. Another thud, louder. The tiger was testing the structure just like before. Vladimir fired a shot through the door. The recoil echoed, and for a second everything went still. Then came a roar, so powerful it vibrated through the air and into his chest. The tiger rammed into the door, splintering the wood. Vladimir fired again and again, the shots deafening in the small cabin. But the creature didn't retreat. It slammed the door once more, this time breaking it open completely. Snow and cold wind burst inside. Vladimir stumbled back, pulling the trigger, but the tiger was already on him. The last thing he saw were those glowing eyes rushing toward him. The gunshot echoes faded. The forest went quiet again. 2 days later, when Yuri Trush and his team arrived at the cabin, they followed the trail of blood and destruction. They found shredded wood, claw marks, and drag patterns in the snow leading deeper into the trees. They followed it carefully, rifles raised, until they reached a small clearing. There, partially buried in the snow, were the remains of Vladimir Markov. His clothes were torn, his body mangled. It was clear the tiger had attacked him, dragged him away, and eaten part of him. Yuri stood over what was left and clenched his jaw. He'd heard rumors of tigers killing people before, but this was something different. This tiger wasn't hunting for food. It was hunting for revenge. Vladimir had stolen its kill, and now it had punished him for it. The men buried what they could find and marked the site. Then Yuri made a decision. He wasn't leaving these woods until he found and killed that tiger. Over the next few days, the team tracked the tiger's movements through the forest. It was smart, too smart. It circled back on its own trail, moved only at night, and avoided every trap they set. At one point, Yuri found a small spot in the snow where the tiger had lain down to rest. The impression was enormous, the body heat still fresh. It meant the predator was close, possibly watching them. That night, the men camped near the river. They built a fire and took turns standing watch. But sometime after midnight, the dog started growling. Its ears went back, tail stiff. It faced the darkness beyond the firelight. Yuri lifted his rifle and scanned the trees. Nothing. The forest was silent. Then he saw movement. A flicker of orange fur behind a tree. He fired, the shot cracking through the cold air. The echo bounced through the valley, then faded. No sound. No movement. He waited for several minutes, then slowly approached the spot. The snow was disturbed, and a few drops of blood stained the ground. The tiger had been hit, but not fatally. It was wounded now, and that made it even more dangerous. By the next morning, a storm rolled in. Snow fell heavily, covering tracks and masking scents. The men pressed on anyway, determined to end it. But the tiger was always one step ahead, using the terrain to its advantage. They found shredded bark on trees, broken branches, and tracks that seemed to appear and vanish. It was toying with them. Yuri began to realize something unsettling. The tiger wasn't just running away. It was leading them somewhere. As they followed the winding trail through dense forest and icy hills, the pink stains of blood reappeared. The same trail they had followed before, only now, it was fresher. Yuri's gut told him the tiger was close. Too close. He motioned for the men to spread out. They moved in silence, rifles raised, scanning the fog-covered trees. Then came the sound, a low growl, deep and guttural, from somewhere ahead. The dog started barking uncontrollably. Yuri's heart raced. He knew what that meant. The tiger wasn't fleeing anymore. It was waiting for them. Yuri's instincts screamed at him to be cautious. He signaled for the men to stop and crouch low. The forest was so quiet now that he could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The fog hung thick around them, twisting through the trees like smoke. Somewhere ahead, the wounded tiger was hiding, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He scanned the landscape, every shadow seeming to move. The snow muffled their footsteps as they advanced slowly, step by step. The trail of blood was still visible, faint but fresh. The creature was close. Then suddenly a flash of orange darted across his vision. A roar split the air, so loud it echoed off the frozen trunks. Before anyone could react, one of the men screamed. The tiger had lunged out of the mist and struck him down in seconds, its claws slicing through his coat. Yuri and the others fired their rifles wildly, the cracks of gunfire echoing through the trees. The tiger vanished as quickly as it had appeared, disappearing into the fog, leaving only the broken snow and the cries of the wounded man behind. When the echo faded, the forest went silent again. The men stood frozen, eyes darting in every direction. Yuri knew what this meant. The tiger was hunting them now, not the other way around. They carried the injured man back toward the river and set up a temporary shelter. He was still alive, but barely. His wounds were deep and he could barely speak. Between ragged breaths, he whispered that the tiger's eyes looked human, intelligent, calculating. That night, Yuri didn't sleep. He sat by the fire, staring into the darkness, his rifle across his knees. Snow fell gently around them, hissing as it hit the flames. Every sound made him tense. Every shadow felt alive. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Then he heard it again, the soft crunch of snow. Something large was moving around their camp. Yuri motioned to the others to stay quiet. The dog growled low, teeth bared. From the edge of the firelight, a massive shape appeared. The tiger's glowing eyes reflected the flames, fixed on them with cold precision. It stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Its fur shimmered under the firelight, and Yuri could see fresh blood matted around its shoulder. His bullet had hit it after all, but the wound hadn't slowed it down. If anything, it had made the animal even more determined. The tiger stopped, locking eyes with Yuri. For several long seconds, they stared at each other across the snow. Then it turned and slipped back into the dark. Yuri exhaled, his grip tightening on the rifle. The message was clear. This wasn't over. By morning, the injured man was gone. They found his sleeping bag torn open, the snow around it soaked in blood and tracks leading into the woods. The tiger had returned while they slept and dragged him away without waking anyone. The men were terrified. Some wanted to turn back, but Yuri refused. He knew if they left now, the tiger would continue to hunt anyone who entered its territory. It had developed a taste for human blood, and now it was acting with reason, not instinct. Yuri decided to set a trap. He found a clearing near the edge of a frozen stream and positioned himself there with 2 other men. They built a small fire and used what remained of the injured man's clothing as bait. The smell of blood filled the cold air. Hours passed. Nothing. The men's nerves began to unravel. Then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the dog started barking again. Short, sharp bursts. Yuri raised his rifle, scanning the tree line, and then he saw it. The tiger was crouched low, barely visible in the dim light, its golden eyes locked on them. It was moving slowly, methodically, circling the clearing. Every time Yuri turned his rifle, it shifted position, staying just beyond the line of fire. The men fired into the darkness, trying to scare it off, but it didn't run. It just kept moving, watching, waiting for a mistake. Finally, it charged. The beast erupted from the fog with terrifying speed. Yuri fired once, twice, 3 times, the bullets cracking through the air. The tiger crashed into one of the men, throwing him to the ground. Yuri fired again, point blank this time. The shot hit. The massive body collapsed into the snow, thrashing violently before going still. The forest fell silent. Yuri approached carefully, rifle still raised. The tiger lay motionless, its chest barely rising. Its eyes remained open, burning with a strange defiance even as the life faded from them. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Yuri lowered his weapon. The hunt was over. He looked down at the creature and felt something unexpected. Respect. The tiger hadn't been a mindless killer. It had acted out of vengeance, intelligence, and an unbreakable instinct to reclaim what was taken from it. When they returned to the village, Yuri told the locals everything that had happened. The people listened in stunned silence. Some called it a monster. Others called it a spirit of the forest, punishing those who disrespected nature's law. Yuri never forgot that day. He knew the tiger wasn't evil. It was justice in its purest, wildest form. And from that moment on, he swore that no man would ever take lightly what belonged to the wild again.